locally as well. All right, so a little bit of context, since I know Mary is jumping in here in the middle. We are in the middle of a story, but it's a pretty familiar story that I'm sure everyone here knows, at least in general. It was the story of Shiva destroying the yajna of Daksha after the self-immolation of his Shiva's wife Daksha's daughter Sati. And we were at the point just after the destruction of the yajna, when the Virabhadra avatar of Shiva has just cut off Daksha's head and thrown it into the yajna fire. And he and his horde of ghouls and such have just left back from Mount Kailasa, leaving the yajna and the whole area in complete ruins. And we're starting with Discourse 6 on Brahma and the other gods proceeding to Kailasa to appease Lord Shiva. Maitreya went on. So this is being narrated by Maharshi Maitreya, narrating it to Vidura. Maitreya went on. Worsted by the forces of Rudra and stricken with fear, and having all their limbs mangled and broken by their tridents, paktishas are a kind of spear, swords, maces, iron clubs, and mallets, the hosts of divinities, along with the priests officiating and assisting at the sacrifice, bowed to Brahma, the self-born, and narrated the story to him in all details. Since they've gone to him, he wasn't there to see it happen himself. The worshipful Brahma, the lotus-born creator, and Lord Narayana, the soul of the universe, who had foreseen this, did not attend Daksha's sacrifice. Hearing their story, Brahma said, on the part of those wishing to get square with a person possessed of great power, who has given them cause for offense, such a desire does not generally conduce to their welfare. You were, on the other hand, actually guilty of offense against Lord Shiva, and that you deprived him of a share in the sacrificial offerings to which he had a rightful claim. Go and invoke his favor by clasping his lotus feet with a guileless heart, for he can be speedily propitiated. If you wish the sacrifice to be revived, make haste to crave the forgiveness of that divinity, Lord Shiva, who is stung to the quick by the abusive words of Daksha and has now lost his beloved spouse. For the world with its guardian deities will be nowhere if he continues to be angry. Neither I nor Yajna Deva, Yajna, of course, is himself a manifestation of Vishnu, as we read about previously, the avatar named Yajna. Neither I nor Yajna, nor you nor the sages, much less any embodied beings, know his true character, Shiva's true character, or the extent of his strength and power. None would feel inclined to contrive any means other than clasping his feet to placate him who is independent. Having thus enjoined the gods, so I just kind of find this interesting. Just comment here. That again, the Bhagavatam refers to Shiva as absolutely independent, a full form of Swayam Bhagavan. Whereas, of course, usually, this being a Vaishnava Purana, it accords that honor to Vishnu. You find the same thing in the Shaiva Puranas. In Shiva Purana, Linga Purana, etc., most of the time they're praising Shiva as supreme. But in chapters which are devotional to Vishnu, which are in all of those Puranas, it accords the exact same honor to Vishnu, same to Parashakti, and so on. There's all these kind of devotional crossovers and showings of respect in all of the scriptures, regardless of their main Ishta Devata of the scripture. Having thus enjoined the gods, and accompanied by them as well as by the mains, mains is translating pitris, meaning currently disembodied souls of the ancestors, and the Prajapatis, the lords of created beings, Brahma, the birthless creator, went from his own realm, the Brahma Loka, to Mount Kailasa, the chief of the mountains, the beloved abode of Lord Shiva. Here the name used for Shiva was Tripurantaka, the destroyer of the three cities, which references a whole different story told in Shiva Purana and some other Puranas. Mount Kailasa is inhabited by gods endowed with supernatural powers from their very birth, or who acquired them by the use of specific herbs, by recourse to austere penance or tapasya, and spells, or through the practice of yoga, and it is ever crowded with kinnaras and gandharvas and apsaras. With its summits consisting of jewels of various kinds, and variegated with minerals of every description, which are clothed with trees, creepers, and shrubs of various species, and infested with wild beasts of every kind, which contain many a rill of limpid water, and are spotted with many a cave and eminence. It affords delight to the wives of Siddhas that sport there in the company of their spouses. The mountain is resonant with the screams of peacocks, and echoes with the melodious humming of bees, blinded by intoxication. Through the shrill notes of its cuckoos and the warbling of other birds, and by its wish-yielding trees with their towering boughs, it seems to call new birds, raising its arms, as if like beckoning more birds to come live there. Through its elephants, it seems to be in motion, the way that it looks. This is actually a very vivid sight, if you've ever seen it or seen a video of it. A herd of elephants moving on a hillside. If they're in a forest and flatland, you can't really see them. Maybe you'll see a couple trees shaking. But if you're looking up a slope of trees with elephants moving in it, you really see the elephants, if it's a whole herd of elephants, pushing and shaking all the trees, and how it looks like the hillside is flowing. It's a really cool sight. So through its elephants, the mountain seems to be in motion. And through its murmuring rills of the streams, it seems to speak. So obviously, this is not talking about the Mount Kailasa in our world. The Mount Kailasa in Tibet that people can go to on our earth is nothing like this. It's very high altitude, far above tree line. There's no plants on it at all, except for maybe a couple little scraps of high altitude lichen. Pretty much no land animals, very few birds, very little running water. It's all frozen year round. This is talking about the celestial Kailasa in Shivaloka, of which the Kailasa in our world is just the closest, a mountain that corresponds to it in a spiritual way, so that devotees of Shiva here have access to a portion of Kailasa's darshan. The mountain is adorned with trees such as mandaras and parijatas. Those are both celestial trees, not found on earth, as well as mundane types of trees such as saralas, that's a type of pine, tamalas, salas, and palmyras, kovidaras, asanas, and arjunas. It is further beautified with mango trees, kadambas and nipas, nagas, punnagas, and champakas, patalas, that's the trumpet flower tree, ashokas and bakulas, kundas, that's jasmine trees, as well as kurabakas, which are the red amaranth, golden lotuses, creepers bearing cardamoms, and that like the cardamom spice, it grows on a vine, little seed pods along a vine. Malatis, kubjas, mallikas, and madhavis. Its beauty is enhanced by breadfruit trees, udumbaras, which are the holy fig tree, plakshas, which are the waved leaf fig tree, banyans and bdelliums, birches, annual trees such as the banana, betel nut trees, rajapugas, which is the areca nut palm, and rose apple trees, date palms, hog plums, amras, that's mango trees, and so on. Preyalas, madhukas, and soap nut trees, and other varieties of trees, and clusters of bamboos, both of the hollow and solid types of bamboo. It is further graced with swarms of birds. So to mention, the reason why this kind of goes back and forth between using the Sanskrit word for a tree or the English word for a tree, like it'll say patalas and malatis, but then it'll say rose apple and date palm, is because a lot of these trees don't have common English words. They have Latin binomials to botanists, but a lot of them, if they're found only in India, don't really have a common English word for them. or some of them aren't even found in India, like Mandaras and Parijatas, which are found not in Bhumiloka at all. The mountain is further graced with swarms of birds, sweetly warbling on the margin of its ponds, rich in their beds of lilies and lotuses of various kinds. It is infested with deer, monkeys, boars, lions, bears, and porcupines, gayals, that's a type of wild cow, and undomesticated bovines, sharabhas, which are a species of 8-footed kind of fantastic beast, tigers, rurus. Rurus are a black deer or a black antelope, wild buffaloes and other wild beasts, as well as with karnantras, ekapadas, ashvamukhas, wolves, and musk deer. And the strands of its ponds look charming with the clusters of banana trees surrounding them. It is hemmed in by the river Nanda, whose waters have been hallowed by the touch of Sati, who bathed in it. The gods felt astonished to see the beauty of Mount Kailasa, the abode of Lord Shiva, the Lord of Ghosts, or Bhuteshvara or Bhutanata. There on that mountain they saw the celebrated and beautiful city of Alaka, the capital of Kubera, the capital city of the Yakshas. It's on one of the lower slopes. It's partly on and underground within Kailasa, and it also ranges onto the neighboring mountain Gandhamadana, the city of Alakapuri, as well as the garden named Saugandhika, where can be seen a species of lotuses bearing the same name, Saugandhika lotuses, which are noted for their celestial fragrance. Along the outskirts of the city flow the two rivers, Nanda and Alakananda, both of which have derived utmost sanctity from the dust of the feet of Lord Vishnu. Descending from their aerial cars, Ovidura, celestial women, exhausted by their amorous dalliance, take a plunge into these streams and sport therein, sprinkling their mates with water. The water of these rivers gets colored by the saffron washed off during their ablutions, and elephants drink it, even though they have no thirst, and give the same to the she-elephants also to drink. Crowded with hundreds of aerial cars made of silver, gold, and most precious jewels, and inhabited by the wives of yakshas, the city looked like the firmament overhead, like the firmament overcast with clouds accompanied by lightning. So in other words, that these jeweled vimanas in the city were like flickers of lightning in a cloud, lighting up the city in a moving way. They overpassed the capital of Kubera, flew above it, as well as the aforementioned garden Saugandhika, which looked charming with its wish-yielding trees laden with fruits, flowers, and leaves of variegated colors. The notes of cuckoos and hosts of other birds in that garden added to the melody of the bees, and it was spotted with ponds containing lotus beds, the most favorite resort of swans, or hansas. By the breezes wafting the perfume of its sandal trees, whose soft bark was scratched by wild elephants rubbing their bodies against it in order to relieve their itching sensation, it flamed the passion of yaksha women again and again. Going further, they saw a number of extensive wells containing beds of blue lotuses and provided with stairs of cat's eye, mineral cat's eye, which were frequented by Kimpurushas. Kimpurushas and Kinnaras are essentially the same thing. They're similar to yakshas, but they're an entire race of spirits that are all of the Tritiya Prakriti. They have no straightforward men and women. Every one of them is of a strange in-between gender. And not far from them, they sighted a banyan tree. The tree had a height of 100 yojanas, an 800-mile tall tree. So just in case you weren't sure, we're not talking about our Earth yet. The tree was 800 miles tall, and its boughs extended to a distance of 75 yojanas, or 600 miles, on every side. It cast a permanent shade on all sides, and thus warded off the sun, yet it contained no nest. There wasn't a single bird's nest in the whole thing. Beneath that tree, which induced great concentration of mind and was the happy resort of those seeking liberation, meaning sages seeking moksha would live under this giant celestial banyan tree, often. The gods beheld Lord Shiva, seated like death, free from anger. Possessed of a most tranquil personality, he was being waited upon by highly realized and peaceful souls, Sanandana and others, as well as by his friend Kubera, the lord of the Yakshas and the Rakshasas. That supreme lord, who is the disinterested friend of the whole universe, remains engaged in the practice of worship, concentration of mind, and deep meditation, and does penance which is conducive to the welfare of the world, out of affection for all. On his body, possessing the hue of an evening cloud, he wears the marks so dear to ascetics: a coat of ashes, a staff, matted locks of hair, and a deerskin, and the crescent moon on his forehead. Seated on a mattress of kusha grass, he was expounding the truth relating to the eternal Brahman to the celestial sage Narada, who was putting questions to him, while other worthy personages also listened. Placing his left lotus foot on his right thigh and the left arm on the left knee, this is called Virasana. It's a yogic posture. And with a rosary, a mala of aksha seeds coiled around his right wrist, an akshamala, he sat with his right hand formed into what is known as the Tarka Mudra. The Tarka Mudra, it's more often called the Jnana Mudra. Jnana Mudra is the word for it that's become more popular now, but thousands of years ago, it was often also called the Tarka Mudra, which is often described as joining the tips of the thumb and the index finger, so this, and straightening the other fingers after joining them together. So these two together, these three fingers touching each other and straight. This is the Taraka Mudra. And it's generally adopted by those teaching wisdom to their disciples. I have seen this firsthand in India. Sadhus or gurus giving lectures will often kind of do this as they're making some point that they particularly want you to listen to. With their palms joined in prayer, the sages, as well as the protectors of the world, bowed low to Lord Shiva, the sage ranking foremost among those given to contemplation, who sat absorbed in the joy of oneness with the absolute and leaning on a wooden support generally used by yogis, like his walking staff. Seeing Brahma the self-born arrived there, Lord Shiva, whose feet are reverenced by the lords of immortals as well as by asura chiefs, rose from his seat and greeted him by bowing his head, even as the most adorable Lord Vishnu bows to Kashyapa. So also the hosts of other siddhas, as well as the great sages who were devoted to Lord Shiva and sat around him, bowed to him. Greeted by them all, Brahma the self-born smilingly addressed Lord Shiva, who wears the crescent moon on his head. The name here used was Lord Chandrasekhara. It's a common name of Shiva, meaning literally like moon-crowned, who was still bowing to him as he said this. Brahma said, "I know you to be the ruler of the universe, for you are the same as the undifferentiated Brahman, the cause of both Shakti and Shiva, who are severally the womb and the seed of creation. Carrying on your sport through Shiva and Shakti, who are essentially one, O Lord, it is you who create, protect, and swallow this universe, even as the spider evolves the cobweb, preserves it, and then takes it back into its mouth. It is you who evolved the yajna through the instrumentality of Daksa for the preservation of the three Vedas." So I've mentioned this before a few times. Sometimes the scriptures will refer to the four Vedas and sometimes to the three. The Atharva Veda is a little bit different from the other three and is sometimes kind of treated as separate. So if it mentions the three Vedas, what it's referring to is the Rig, Sama, and Yajur without the Atharva. And by you have been fixed the bounds of propriety which the Brahmanas who have adopted sacred vows duly respect. O blissful Lord, you confer heaven or even final beatitude, final moksha, on him who performs benevolent deeds, and assign the frightful inferno to the perpetrator of evil deeds. But how is it that in the case of some individuals, the fruit of certain acts is quite the contrary? So apparently he's taking the opportunity to get some questions in the course of trying to clear up the yajna, the debacle of Daksha's yajna. Indeed, anger does not generally overpower, even as it overwhelms the ignorant, the noble souls who have surrendered themselves to your feet, who behold you in all living beings, and who are inclined to see all living beings in their own self as identical with them. Let not one like you kill them whose mind perceives diversity and whose eyes are fixed on the ritual, nay, who have a malignant mind and whose heart is ever burning at the sight of others' prosperity, and who, being naturally disposed to hurt others' feelings, prick them with abusive words, and are thus doomed by providence. Providence, of course, being, in this case, the inevitability of their own karma returning to them. On them whose mind is bewildered by the Maya of Lord Vishnu, whose navel is the seat of a lotus, so difficult to overcome, and whose eye is fixed on diversity, seeing how things are different and not seeing how they are the same. Pious souls only shower their grace because of their compassionate nature. They never use their power against something which they believe has been wrought by their own adverse fate. Omniscient as you are, your judgment has not been clouded by that Maya of the Supreme Person, which is so difficult to get through. Therefore, my Lord, be pleased to shower your grace on these people, whose judgment has been impaired by Maya and who have accordingly fixed their mind on the ritual. O Lord, presiding over destruction, revive the sacrifice started by Prajapati Daksha, which has been wrecked by you and could not therefore be consummated, which was due to the fact that the unwise priests did not offer you your share, to which you had a rightful claim, inasmuch as it is by you that a sacrifice is made to yield the desired fruit. Let the Yajamana, Daksha, come to life again. Let the god Bhaga get back his eyes. Let the sage Bhrigu's mustaches and beard sprout again, and let the god Pusha's teeth reappear as before. Further, let the gods and priests whose limbs have been broken by weapons and stones be whole again at once by your favor, O Rudra. Let that which is left of the sacrifice offerings be your share, O God presiding over destruction. Let this sacrifice, O Rudra, be consummated today with your share, O destroyer of sacrifice. Thus ends the sixth discourse, entitled The Appeasement of Rudra, in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 7, on the completion of Daksha's sacrifice. Maitreya resumed. Thus supplicated by Brahma the unborn, Lord Shiva, the father of the universe, felt much pleased, and with a hearty laugh said, O Vidura, possessed of mighty arms, Maitreya is saying this to Vidura, to whom he's narrating all this. Listen, Sri Mahadeva said, I never complain of, nor do I recollect the misdemeanor of fools dominated by the Lord's Maya, O Prajapati. I have meted out punishment to them, just in order to teach them a lesson. Let Prajapati Daksha, whose head has been burnt, have the head of a goat above the neck. You'll recall that he had already been cursed for to have his head turned into a goat's head, so that's why Shiva is saying, let the curse play out. And let the god Bhaga look on his share in the sacrificial offerings through the eyes of Mitra. In other words, no, I'm not going to unblind him. He's going to stay blind, and his best friend Mitra can see for him. Let the god Pusha, who eats flour alone, chew the same with the teeth of the sacrificer. So enjoy it through the Yajamana eating the prasad, or otherwise Pusha is offered porridges or puddings or things that don't require teeth to chew. And let the other devas have all their limbs restored to a sound condition now that they have assigned to me the remains of a yajna. He does grant that one. Let the Advaryus and the other priests use the arms of the Ashvins, who currently can't use their arms because their arms are broken or wounded and so on. That the Ashvin devas will perform the functions for them, while such of them as have lost their hands may use the hands of Pusha, and let the sage Bhrigu have the beard and mustaches of a goat to replace his, which were just ripped out. So the Advaryus, which were just mentioned, the function of an Advaryu, it's a type of Brahmin priest in the Vedic Srauta Yajna. They measure the sacrificial ground. The whole ground of a yajna is, in strict Vedic procedures, is precisely measured, like inch for inch, things are laid out. They build the altar, they prepare the sacrificial vessels, they fetch wood for the fires and water, they kindle the fire. And while doing that, they also are chanting the Yajurveda. So that's just to explain what Advaryus are. Maitreya continued. Hearing the words of Lord Shiva, the most bountiful, on that occasion, all the creatures present there forthwith exclaimed, well said, with their soul fully gratified. Thereafter, the gods, as well as the sages, invited Lord Shiva, who showers the desired blessings on his devotees, to grace the sacrifice, and, taking with them the bountiful Lord, Shiva, and Brahma, the creator, went once more to the site of the sacrifice. Having accomplished all that Lord Shiva had commanded them, they joined the head of the sacrificial goat to the trunk, the severed neck of Daksha. On the head being joined, Daksha, who received a kindly glance from Rudra, immediately rose as though from slumber, and beheld Lord Shiva, the delighter of all, in front of him. Then Daksha Prajapati, whose mind had been tainted by ill will towards Lord Shiva, he whose banner bears the emblem of a bull, became free from malice by virtue of Shiva's gracious look, even as a pool becomes clear in autumn. That's a common simile used in the Bhagavatam, referring to in autumn after the monsoon, which churns up water and makes lakes muddy and so on. When it stops raining, the pools and lakes all become clearer. He felt inclined to offer praises, but could not do so on account of affection and grief as he now recollected his deceased daughter, who he just drove to suicide, essentially, and his throat was choked with tears. Though overwhelmed with love, the wise Prajapati controlled his mind with difficulty and proceeded to extol the Lord with sincere devotion. Daksha said, "Oh, you did me a great favor in that you meted out punishment to me in order to correct me, even though I slighted you. You too, Sri Hari, and yourself, have no disregard even for fallen Brahmanas. How then can you ignore those who have taken sacred vows? As Brahma, you evolved first of all, out of your mouth, Brahmanas rich in learning, austerity, and sacred vows, for preserving the spiritual truth. It is therefore, O Supreme Lord, that you protect the Brahmana race in all crises, wielding the rod of punishment to correct them if they go astray, even as the herdsman protects his cattle, staff in hand. May that Lord who, though insulted with abuses piercing as arrows in open assembly, by me, ignorant as I was of his reality, overlook that fault of mine and saved me from falling down through the vilification of the most adorable, by casting his gracious look upon me. May he be pleased with his own benevolent act, since I am utterly incapable of repaying his obligation, and thus winning his pleasure." Maitreya went on. Having thus sought the forgiveness of Lord Shiva, who showers the desired blessings on his devotees, and obtained leave of Brahma the creator, Daksha had the ritual recommenced by the preceptor, priests, and others, the guru and the other priests. For the removal of the touch of the pramatas, these are the bhutaganas who have defiled the yajna. So for the removal of that pollution, and with a view to the continuity of the sacrifice, the good brahmanas offered to the fire the oblation called Purodasha. This is a mass of ground rice rounded into a kind of cake, and it's used for if somehow your yajna was interrupted by impurity, like this one was. This one extremely was. There were like ghouls urinating into the yajna fire and so on. The Purodasha and the Vedic mantras that go with it are to restore the purity of a yajna and resume it. Originally, this offering was intended for Lord Vishnu and placed in 3 separate receptacles. Even as the Yajamana, Daksha, O ruler of men, Maitreya is addressing Vidura as such, contemplated with a guileless mind along with the Advaryu who stood holding the oblation in his hand, Sri Hari appeared in person before their eyes, eclipsing the splendor of those present there by his own brilliance which illumined all the 10 quarters, the 10 quarters being north, south, east, west, the cross quarters, and up and down. The Lord, who was forthwith born by Tarksha, that's Garuda, who had the 2 types of samas for his wings, the Brihat and the Ratantara. Those are the 2 Chandahas of the Samaveda. Swarthy of hue with a girdle of gold, Srihari was adorned by a crown shining like the sun, while his countenance was graced with locks dark as bees, as well as with earrings. With his arms, that severally bore a conch, a lotus, a discus, a shaft, a bow, a mace, a sword, and a shield, and were eager and which shone, he looked like a blossoming Karnikara tree. With goddess Lakshmi lodged on his bosom, in the Srivatsa mark that is embedded in his chest, and adorned with a garland of sylvan flowers, he enraptured the whole world with his winsome smiles and glances. Fans and chowries which looked like swans were waving on both his sides, and he shone splendid with a moon-like white umbrella over his head. Seeing him arrived near, all the hosts of divinities and other beings under the leadership of Brahma the Creator, Indra, and Lord Shiva, instantly rose from their seats and bowed low to him. Their splendor obscured by his brilliance, they stood dumbfounded and struck with awe, and with their palms joined over their head, they approached Lord Vishnu in a prayerful mood. Even though their mind and speech had no access to his glory, Brahma and others began to the best of their ability to glorify the Lord, who had manifested his form in order to shower his blessings on those present there. Gladly extolling the Lord with joined palms and a concentrated mind, Daksha sought the protection of the Lord, the supreme teacher of the Prajapatis, who is the enjoyer as well as the bestower of the fruit of all yajnas, and was surrounded by Sunanda, Nanda, and other attendants, and who had taken the excellent receptacle of presents from Daksha's hands. Daksha said, "In your own glorious being, you are pure consciousness, undifferentiated and fearless beyond all the states of mind. You stand free, having negated Maya, but when, assuming jivahood by the same Maya, you abide in that Maya, you appear as tainted." The priest said, "With our mind foolishly attached to the ritual, as the result of the imprecation uttered by Nandishvara, O Lord, untainted by Maya, we know not your true character." So this was this curse by Nandi, that they would become lost in the ritual and forget its true import. And that's the curse they're referring to, which they now remember in the light of Vishnu. "We have known only that form of yours which is known by the name of sacrifice, which yields religious merit and is the theme of the three Vedas, and for conducting which the sphere of each particular deity has been defined." The superintending priests said, "Tormented by desire and oppressed by the heavy burden of the body and house, this company of ignorant folk has been traversing the path of transmigration, which is devoid of any shelter and difficult to tread on account of great hardships, where the fierce serpent of death ever lies in wait, nay, which tantalizes the wayfarers with the mirage of sensuous pleasures, and is full of pitfalls in the pairs of opposites, and which is fearful on account of carnivorous animals in the form of wicked people, and is surrounded by the wildfire of grief. When will this crowd resort to your feet for shelter, O Lord, affording protection to all?" Rudra said, "Your charming feet, O bestower of boons, confer on those who are actuated by some desire all the blessings sought for in this world. Nay, they deserve to be worshipped with reverence even by hermits who are not attached to enjoyments. If ignorant folk dub me as one who has cast to the winds all the rules of decorum, me whose mind is fixed on your feet, by your supreme grace I pay no heed to it." Bhrigu said, "Brahma and other embodied beings who have been deprived of self-knowledge by your incomprehensible Maya and sleep in the darkness of ignorance are unable to know even to this day your reality, which permeates their own self. Therefore be gracious to them, since you are the friend, nay, the very self of your suppliants." Brahma said, "Your reality is not what the jiva perceives through the senses, which cognize the distinctive characteristics of objects, since you are the very ground of knowledge, the objects of sense perception, and the senses themselves, and therefore distinct from this illusory world of matter." Indra said, it's particularly significant for Brahma to describe the illusory world of matter as such, given that he created it personally. Indra said, This personality of yours, O immortal Lord, which has manifested the universe and is distinguished by 8 long and stout arms, holding weapons in readiness to exterminate the enemies of devas, he says, hopefully being a deva himself, brings delight to our soul and eyes. The priests' wives said, this sacrifice, which was evolved by Brahma Prajapati as a means of worshipping you, has been wrecked today by Lord Shiva, who was angered by Daksha. Therefore, O embodiment of sacrifices, hallow this sacrifice of ours, which has been robbed of all joy and festivity and wears the appearance of a crematory. Hallow it with your eyes, lovely like a pair of lotuses. The sages said, singular are your doings, O Lord, in that while you perform deeds yourself, you are not affected by them. Your karma does not return to you, in other words. You do not think much even of Lakshmi, the supreme goddess, whom everyone worships for the sake of prosperity, even though she herself remains ever waiting on you. Think much of, as in, you are not bound by karma, even in the form of attachment to your own beloved wife, even though she dwells in your heart perpetually, and so on. The Siddhas said, scorched by the wildfire of afflictions and oppressed by the thirst for sensuous enjoyment, this elephant of our mind has plunged into the river of pure nectar in the shape of your stories, and thinks no more of that forest conflagration, nor comes out of the river, like one that has attained oneness with Brahman. The sacrificer's wife said, in other words, Prasuti, Daksha's wife, she said, welcome is your visit, O Lord, be gracious to me. Hail to you, O abode of Sri. May you and your beloved spouse, goddess Lakshmi, protect us. Without you, O supreme ruler, a sacrifice, though complete in all its limbs, does not present a charming look, any more than a man who is left without a head, a mere trunk, though perfect in all other limbs. The guardians of the spheres said, can you be seen with our senses, revealing as they do this unreal world of matter? You who witness things from within our heart and by whom all this phenomenal world is seen. It is your Maya, O infinite Lord, that through the 6th you appear invested with a material body. In other words, that through the 6th, being through a quality beyond the 5 elements, you appear to our physical sight as something as if made of the 5 elements of this world. The masters of yoga, Sanaka and others, said, no one else is dearer to you than he, O Lord, who sees no difference between you, the soul of the universe, and himself. Nevertheless, be gracious, O lover of your devotees, to them who resort to you with exclusive devotion as to their master. By your Maya, which exhibits a large variety of gunas, due to the destiny of the jivas, you give rise to a sense of diversity with regard to yourself, for the creation, preservation, and destruction of the universe, although in your own state you have cast off from yourself all motions of diversity as well as the 3 gunas. Obeisance to you. Brahma, Veda incarnate, said, he's speaking for the 2nd time here, hail to you who take upon yourself the quality of sattva in order to yield dharma and the other objects of human pursuit, meaning artha, kama, and moksha, and are at the same time destitute of all attributes, and whose real nature neither I nor even others know. Agni said, with my flames brightly kindled by your effulgence, I bear the oblation soaked in ghee in every good sacrifice. You are Yajna personified, as well as the protector of Yajnas. You are 5-fold in character, in the form of the 5 varieties of sacrifices, these being the Agnihotra, the Darsha, the Purnamasa, the Chaturmasya, and the Pashusoma. And you are duly worshipped with the 5 kinds of sacrificial formulas occurring in the Yajurveda. I bow low to you. The Devas, altogether, said, at the end of the previous round of creation and before this creation, it was you, the first person, the Adipurusha, who reposed on the excellent bed of Shesha, on the Lord of Serpents, on those waters. The self-same you, the way of whose realization is sought after in their heart by the Siddhas. have appeared before our eyes today and protect us, your dependents. The Gandharvas said, these Marichi and other sages, as well as the hosts of divinities such as Brahma the creator, Indra the lord of paradise, and others with Rudra at their head, are but rays of your part manifestations, O Shining One. We ever make obeisance to you, infinite Lord, to whom this universe is a mere toy box. The Vidyadharas said, that's another type of devas, essentially, another type of celestial spirits. After attaining the human body, a means of realizing the highest object of human pursuit, being moksha, the foolish jiva regards it as his own, nay, his very self, regards the body as his self. And though reproached by his own senses that have strayed from the path of virtue, meaning through his senses he experiences unpleasant results of his attachment. Because if your body is you, then when your body feels pain, your own senses are essentially reproaching you for your false identification, because then the pain is something that is harming what you regard as yourself. Despite this, he longs only for the unreal pleasures of sense. He alone who quaffs the nectar of your stories is able to shake off completely the infatuation of his mind. The Brahmanas said, you are the sacrifice, you are the offering, you are yourself the fire, you are the mantra, the sacrificial wood, the kusha grass, and the vessels, and you are the priest superintending and officiating at the sacrificer and his wife, the deity to be propitiated, the act of offering oblations into the sacred fire, the oblation offered to the pitris, the juice extracted from the soma plant, the ghee, and the sacrificial animal. Since indeed there was animal sacrifice being practiced in this yajna, they were sacrificing a goat. Radha, if you want to note this particular part, this is Skandha 4. We're in a long chapter. What was the chapter number? 7, I think? 7. Skandha 4, chapter 7. Appearing as the mighty boar, it was you who sportfully lifted the earth out of the depths of the ocean on your tusks, even as a lordly elephant would lift a lotus plant, roaring and being glorified by the yogis. Nay, the Vedas constitute your very body, and you are both the institution of sacrifice and the vow to perform a sacrifice. Therefore be gracious to us, whose noble undertaking was interrupted and who were therefore longing for your sight. Interruptions in sacrificial performances disappear when, O Lord of sacrifices, your name is chanted by men. Hail to you. Maitreya resumed. While Lord Vishnu, the controller of the senses and the protector of sacrifices, was thus being extolled by everyone in turn, the wise Daksha, or blessed Vidura, renewed the sacrifice that had been wrecked by Virabhadra, propitiated, as it were, by his share of oblations, in the shape of the Purodasha offered in 3 receptacles, O sinless Vidura. The Lord, who is the enjoyer of all oblations, being the self of all, accosted Daksha and spoke to him. So Daksha had resumed the yajna, but Vishnu was like, hold on, don't resume yet. The Lord said, the supreme cause of the universe, I am also Brahma the creator and Lord Shiva the destroyer of the universe. I am the self, the Lord, and the witness, self-effulgent and unqualified. Embracing my own Maya, consisting of the 3 gunas, it is I who create, protect, and destroy the universe and have assumed names appropriate to my functions, O Brahmana. It is in such a Brahman, the supreme spirit, or Paramatman, who is one without a second, that the ignorant fool views Brahma, Rudra, and other beings as distinct entities. Just as a man never conceives his own head, hands, and other limbs as belonging to anyone else, even so, he who is devoted to me does not regard his fellow creatures as something distant from himself. He who sees no difference between us 3, Brahma, Rudra, and myself, who are identical in essence and the very selves of all living beings, attains peace, O Daksha. So he's chiding Daksha for having Daksha has already realized this at this point, but just to make sure he fully understands, he's chiding Daksha for having been anti-Shiva. Maitreya went on. Thus enlightened by the Lord, Daksha, the chief of Prajapatis, worshipped Sri Hari through the sacrifice sacred to himself, meaning the Trikapaleshti Yajna, and then the other gods, both through the principal and secondary types of sacrifices. With a concentrated mind, he also waited upon Lord Rudra with the share due to him, and upon which was the entire rest of what was to be offered, since that was the agreement they made with Rudra, and upon the other gods, including those that drink the soma juice and those that do not, through the rite called Udavasana, which is performed at the end of a yajna. And having concluded the sacrifice, he then performed along with the priests the sacred ablutions, known by the name of Avabhrita. And having blessed Daksha, who had by his own greatness attained supernatural powers, with devotion to righteousness, the gods ascended to heaven. Having thus cast off her previous body, Sati, daughter of Daksha, was reborn through Mena, the spouse of Himavan, the deity who presides over the Himalaya mountains. This is what we have heard, Maitreya said. Just as having lain dormant, the divine energy embraces the Lord at the dawn of the next creation. The divine energy, meaning the Parashakti, re-embraces the Lord, and that their union gives birth to the new creation. Ambika sought union once more with her beloved spouse, Lord Shiva, her only resort, exclusively devoted as she was to him. This story of Lord Shiva, the source of bliss, who wrecked Daksha's sacrificial performance, was heard by me, Maitreya is saying, from the great devotee of the Lord, Uddhava, a disciple of the sage Brahaspati, the guru of the Devas. The man who, with a feeling of devotion, daily listens to and repeats this sanctifying story of Lord Shiva, which confers renown and longevity and wipes out a multitude of sins, shakes off all sin, O descendant of Kuru. Thus ends the 7th discourse, entitled The Revival of Daksha's Sacrificial Performance, in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. So that's the end of that whole story cycle. It's a little bit earlier than we normally end. The next discourse does start a whole new story, the story of Dhruva, which is a very long story. It's going to take us more than one session to get through the story of Dhruva, so we could start into it now. We could stop here, though. What do you guys think? I think I'm going to do one more, if that's okay. Given that it's a little earlier than we usually stop, I'll do one more discourse and then stop. Just get into the next story. Since it's not the next story is going to take us more than one session, regardless. Yeah, I love it too. The Dhruva story. So discourse 7 on Dhruva's departure for the woods. So for context, Maitreya was telling a huge genealogy to Vidura, in which he was mentioning this and that Prajapati and their wives and children, talking about, he kind of mentioned Sati and mentioned Sati didn't have any children because she died first, and Vidura was like, wait, what? And so he told this whole story, and this whole thing was like a little aside that turned into a really big aside in this genealogy, and now he just picks up where he was in the genealogy. So Maitreya continued. Sanaka and his 3 brothers, Sanandana, Sanatana, and Sanat Kumara, Narada, Ribhu, Hansa, Aruni, and Yati, these sons of Brahma the Creator did not enter the life of a householder, since they instead vowed themselves to a life of perpetual celibacy. Mrasa, who was the wife of Adharma, Mrasa is the female spirit presiding over falsehood, the wife of Adharma, another son of Brahma, the spirit presiding over unrighteousness, gave birth, O destroyer of enemies, to Dambha and Maya. Maya, in this case, being the female spirit of deceit, and to Nirti, the demon goddess presiding over the southwest. Sorry, not Nirti, the demon goddess who presides over the southwest, who was issueless, who had no children, adopted the couple. So Nirti is sometimes referred to as male and sometimes as female. Nirti is Tritiya Prakriti of transgender or gender fluid. So here being called male, but the name is grammatically female, and in the Vedas referred to as female. So Nirti adopted the couple as his son and daughter-in-law. Of these two, Dambha and Maya, who were brother and sister, in addition to being husband and wife, were born Lobha, the spirit of greed, and Nikriti, the female spirit of wickedness, O Vidura of great wisdom. And of these latter came into being Krodha, the spirit of anger, and Hinsa, the goddess of violence, from whom again were sprung Kali, the spirit of strife, the demon who personifies the Kali Yuga, and his sister Durukti, the goddess of abusive speech. Kali in his turn begot through his sister Durukti Bhaya, the deity of fear, and Mrityu, the goddess of death, O Vidura. And of these two were born Niraya, one of the presiding deities of the Narakas, and Yatana, the goddess of torture. Briefly thus have I told you, O sinless Vidura, about the family of Adharma, which leads to the dissolution of the universe. By hearing this genealogy, which sanctifies a man by helping him in eschewing all these, thrice repeated, by hearing this genealogy thrice repeated, a man shakes off the impurity of his mind. Well, I shall now describe the line of Swayambhuva Manu of sacred renown, sprung from a part of Brahma, specifically from the right half of Brahma's body, himself a ray of Srihari, O scion of Kuru. Priyavrata and Uttanapada, the two sons of Shatarupa's husband, Swayambhuva Manu, were intent on the protection of the world, endowed as they were with a ray of Lord Vasudeva for that purpose. Suniti and Suruchi were the two wives of Uttanapada. Of these, Suruchi, the younger one, was the more beloved of her lord, but not so the other one, Suniti, whose son was Dhruva. In other words, he preferred his younger wife. On a certain day, while fondling Suruchi's son, Prince Uttama, whom he had seated on his lap, the Raja Uttanapada did not welcome Dhruva, the son of his older and less favored wife, who too sought to climb to his lap. To Dhruva, her co-wife's son, thus striving, Suruchi, who was exceedingly proud, spitefully spoke, the king listening. She said to him, the child Dhruva, O child, you are not fit to ascend the royal throne, inasmuch as, though sprung from the king's loins, you were not conceived by me. Alas, you are yet a child, and surely know not that you were born in the womb of another woman. That is why you aspire for an object so difficult to attain. Propitiating the Supreme Person through austere grace, seek rebirth through my womb by his grace, if you covet the king's throne. Maitreya went on. Pierced by the poignant remarks of his stepmother and hissing in indignation like a serpent beaten with a staff, Dhruva left his father, who kept gazing mutely, and Dhruva went away crying loudly into the presence of his own mother. Suniti lifted up in her arms the child, who was sobbing with quivering lips, and was sore distressed to hear from the mouth of the other inmates of the gymnasium, meaning the other dwellers within the family quarters of the palace, what his co-wife had said. Scorched by grief as a wild creeper by forest fire, the young girl lost heart and cried. Her eyes, which were graceful as a pair of lotuses, were filled with tears as she recalled the remarks of his co-wife. Seeing no way out of her sorrow, the girl heaved a deep sigh and said to her child, Entertain no evil thought about others, dear child, for a man reaps the very suffering he has inflicted on others. Suruchi has truly said that you were born in the womb and brought up with the milk of my wretched self, whom the king feels ashamed to accept as his wife, nay, even as his servant maid. Therefore, dear child, abide ungrudgingly by those words, which, though uttered by your stepmother, are nonetheless true, and adore the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, if you aspire to the royal throne like Uttama, your half-brother. It was by worshipping the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, who assumed the quality of Sattva for the protection of the universe, that Brahma, your great-grandfather, attained to that most exalted position, which is an object of reverence, even to those who have conquered their mind and senses. Even so, your grandfather, the worshipful Manu, secured both earthly and heavenly bliss as well as final moksha, which is so difficult to attain by any other means, by worshipping the Lord with single-minded devotion through sacrifices with liberal sacrificial fees. Take refuge, my child, in him alone, who is so fond of his devotees, and access to whose lotus feet is sought after by men keen to get liberated. And imprinting his image on your mind, purified by devotion to your duty and exclusively attached to him, adore the Supreme Person. I find none other than the Lord with lotus-like eyes who can wipe out your sorrow. Even Sri, who is eagerly sought, dear one, by all others, seeks after him, holding a lotus in her hand. Maitreya resumed. Hearing the words thus addressed by his mother Suniti, which were conducive to the object sought after by him, Dhruva fully controlled his mind by force of his reason, and sallied forth from his father's capital. When Narada heard of this and learnt what the child intended to do, he met him on the way, and touching the latter's head with his purifying hand, said, to himself, wondering, "Oh, the spirit of the Kshatriyas which cannot brook insult! Though yet a child, he has taken to heart the stinging words of his stepmother." And then Narada said to the child Dhruva, "We do not find anything conducive to your honor or ignominy at this stage, dear son, a child as you are, fond of play and other things. Even if you have developed the sense of honor and ignominy, there are no diverse causes of discontent for a man other than ignorance. For whatever he reaps in the world follows from his own actions. Seeing the ways of God, therefore, a wise man should rest contented, dear son, with whatever is placed within his reach by providence. Besides, he whose grace you seek to win by means of the discipline taught by your mother is accounted by me as hard to propitiate. Sages fail to discover his path even though they seek for it with the help of abstract meditation, coupled with rigorous self-discipline, carried on in an attached way through numberless births. Therefore, let this futile pertinacity of yours cease. You may strive when the time for practices leading to final beatitude comes, meaning in your old age, when if you, after living the life of a Kshatriya, whether or not you become Raja, you would be high placed in the court. When you get old and retire from worldly life, then you can strive for that. Reconciling oneself to that which is decreed for that being by providence in the form of joy or sorrow, an embodied being reaches the end of darkness. A man should be pleased at the sight of one who is superior in qualities, should have tender feelings towards one who is inferior in accomplishment, and seek friendship with one who is on a par with him. By doing so, a man is never overwhelmed with afflictions. Dhruva said, "Your venerable self has graciously shown a remedy for those whose mind is disturbed by joys and sorrows, a remedy which cannot be easily found by people like us. Yet in the heart of my insubordinate self, who has inherited a violent martial spirit, a heart which has been cleft by the shaft-like taunts of Suruchi, my stepmother, the precept has failed to make any abiding impression. Be pleased, O holy sage, to tell me a good path, keen as I am to attain to a place which is the highest in all the three worlds, and which has not been attained to by our forefathers or anyone else. You are surely no other than the son of the worshipful Brahma, who for the good of the world roams about like the sun playing on his lute." Maitreya resumed. The worshipful Narada was pleased. So in other words, Narada never introduced himself, but Dhruva has heard of him and has recognized him. Maitreya resumed. The worshipful Narada was pleased to hear the aforesaid words, and full of compassion, replied to the child in the following excellent words. Narada said, "The course pointed out by your mother is the one leading to your highest good." So Narada was essentially, he was trying to dissuade Dhruva by way of testing him. And when found that Dhruva was not going to be turned from his path, is now going to help him. Lord Vasudeva represents that course. Adore him with a mind exclusively devoted to him. For him who seeks his own good in the shape of what is known by the names of Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, adoration of Sri Hari's feet is the only means to that end. Therefore, God bless you, dear child. Seek the holy bank of the Yamuna, covered by the sacred spot of Madhuvana. Madhuvana back at this time was just a wild jungle. Later on, the city of Mathura was built on the spot, which is ever hallowed with the presence of Sri Hari. Bathing 3 times in the blessed 3 times a day, in other words, in the blessed waters of the Kalindi. Kalindi and Yamuna are 2 names for the same river. And after finishing one's proper duties, one should spread a seat and squat thereon. Having gradually cast off the impurities of one's life breath, senses, and mind by means of the 3-fold pranayama, one should contemplate with a steady mind on Sri Hari as follows. So contemplate on Sri Hari like this. With an ever cheerful face and eyes, he is always disposed to shower grace. He has a shapely nose, charming brows, and lovely cheeks, and is the most enchanting of all the gods. Youthful and possessed of charming limbs, he has rosy lips and reddish eyes, and is the resort of his suppliants. Nay, he is supremely delightful, fit to protect all, and an ocean of tenderness, bearing the mark of Srivatsa on his chest, and swarthy as a cloud, or like the dark blue color of a monsoon cloud. He has all the features of an extraordinary personage and wears a garland of sylvan flowers. And his 4 arms are distinguished by a conch, a discus or chakram, a mace, and a lotus. He wears a diadem and a pair of earrings, and is adorned with armlets and bracelets. His neck adds to the beauty of the Kaustubha gem, rather than vice versa. In other words, he's wearing this huge jewel on his neck, but so beautiful is his neck that it is his neck which beautifies the gem, rather than vice versa. And he has a piece of yellow silk wrapped about his loins. Encircled by a girdle of many strings, he has a shining pair of gold anklets, is most charming to look at, wears a serene aspect, and brings delight to the mind and eyes. He stands in the mental horizon of those who worship him. His feet, resplendent with a row of gems in the form of his toenails, installed in the pericarp of their lotus-like heart. With a steadied and concentrated mind, he should visualize the Lord, the foremost of all bestowers of boons, as smiling and casting a loving glance at the devotee. The mind of a man who thus contemplates on the Lord's most blessed form is soon immersed in supreme bliss and never gives up the meditation. Also hear from me, O Prince, the most secret formula, which should be muttered along with this meditation, and by repeating which for 7 days and nights a man is able to behold the siddhas moving in the air. This mantra is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. While repeating this sacred formula, a wise man should perform the Lord's worship with the help of material substances using various articles with due regard to the differences of place and time. So in other words, offer to the Lord what you have access to, depending on where you are and what season it is, and so on. He should worship the Lord with undefiled water, flowers, wild roots and fruits, etc., sprouts of approved plants, barks of trees, with the tulsi, so beloved of the Lord. Having secured an image of stone or any other substance, he should worship the Lord through the same, or simply through the medium of earth, water, and so on. In other words, if you don't have a murti, an idol, you can just mix some earth and water and make one out of mud, if you're just doing tapas in the jungle by yourself. And with his mind and speech duly controlled, he should subsist on a limited quantity of wild fruits, etc., and remain calm and collected and absorbed in contemplation. He should also mentally, surveying on a limited quantity of wild fruits, etc., what that's meaning is essentially to be like a fruitarian, to not even kill plants, far beyond vegetarianism, to not even kill plants for your own sustenance. Someone who's engaged in this rigorous tapas, to eat only what can be harvested from a plant without killing it. He should also mentally survey the soul-stirring deeds the glorious lords will perform in the course of the manifestations he assumes according to his pleasure by his own incomprehensible maya. You'll notice this is being said near the beginning of a cosmic kalpa. So he's saying the deeds the glorious Lord will perform, since in the current course of the universe, most of them, like Rama avatar, Krishna avatar, these all haven't happened yet, as of when this story is happening. So they're mostly referred to as being in the future tense. One should offer to the Lord, who stands revealed in the form of a mantra, all the articles of worship prescribed for him by the ancients, while repeating this various mantra of 12 letters, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Being thus waited upon with body, mind, and speech through loving worship according to one's choice, the Lord heightens the devotion of men who adore him in the right way and in a guileless spirit, and bestows on them the boon of their liking from among dharma and the other objects of human pursuit, kama, artha, moksha. Bestows whichever one you most like, or whichever one you're most attached to. If the devotee is averse to sensuous enjoyment, doesn't want kama, he should wait upon the Lord himself with an intense practice of devotion carried on uninterruptedly for the sake of final beatitude or moksha. But if you're not averse to sensuous enjoyment, if that's where your attachments still are, then fine. The Lord, by this course, will grant you kama, and that's perfectly fine. It'll just won't lead you to moksha yet. Thus instructed, the prince Dhruva went round the sage, parikrama around him as a mark of respect, and then bowed low to him, then proceeded to the holy tract of Madhuvana, adorned with the footprints of Srihari, who had once stepped there, which is why it is so holy. When he had left for the forest, so suitable for austere penance, the sage Narada made his way to the gymnasium of Raja Uddanapada. This is an obscure word, the gymnasium, essentially meaning the family quarters of the palace. And when the king had offered him worship in the form of water to wash his hands and feet with and so on, and he was comfortably seated, he spoke to the king. Narada said, "With a withering face, what are you brooding over so deeply? I hope neither your luxuries, nor your religious merit, nor again your wealth has suffered any diminution." The king said, "Uxorious and merciless as I am, O sage, I exiled my son, a child of 5 years, who was very noble and wise, along with his mother." Of course, he didn't literally exile them, but Dhruva of his own accord left. And then when he left, well, apparently Dhruva's mother, when he found out he had left, she went after him, but failed to find him, and now they're both gone. "Wolves, O holy Brahmana, may not eat up the helpless child, who may be lying in the forest, fatigued and famished, with his lotus-like face faded." In other words, may they not eat him. He's praying. May he not fall prey to wolves or something else like wolves. "Oh, just imagine the wickedness of my uxorious self, who did not greet the child while he was climbing up my lap with affection, extremely vile as I am." Narada said, "No, sorrow not for your child, who enjoys the protection of the Lord, O ruler of the people, and whose glory shall pervade the world, for you know not his greatness. Having wrought an achievement which even the protectors of the world find it difficult to perform, the glorious child shall return before long, O king, enhancing your reputation." Maitreya continued, "On hearing this message of Narada, the celestial sage, Uddanapada remained exclusively engrossed in the thought of his son, neglectful of his royal fortune." Meanwhile, we cut back to Dhruva. There at Madhuvana, Dhruva bathed in the Yamuna, and having remained without food that night, and thus purified himself through fasting, he waited upon the Lord with a concentrated mind according to the sage's instructions. Eating the kapita and badara fruit, that's the wood apple and other fruits, just enough to keep his body and soul together, at the end of every 3 nights. So he ate some fruits every 3rd night, and that's all. Just the absolute minimum to keep his body alive. He did that for 1 month. The prince spent 1 month in worshipping Srihari. Likewise, during the 2nd month, the child adored the all-pervading Lord, feeding on withered blades of grass and leaves every 6th day. He spent the 3rd month waiting upon the glorious Lord through samadhi, taking water every 9th day, no food at all, and drinking only once every 9 days. Having controlled his breath, he fixed his mind and meditated on the divinity during the 4th month too, inhaling once every 12th day. When the 5th month commenced, the prince stood motionless like a post on 1 foot, contemplating on the absolute Brahman with his breath fully controlled. In other words, no longer breathing at all. Withdrawing his mind, the substratum of the senses and their objects, from all other objects, he fixed it on the form of the Lord, enthroned in his heart, and perceived nothing else. All the 3 worlds began to shake as he meditated on Brahman, on the supreme Brahman, the ground of Mahat-tattva and other categories. In other words, that from which all else is based, the ruler of both Pradhana and Purusha. When the prince Dhruva stood on 1 foot, the earth, pressed by his great toe, leaned to one side at that spot, even as the boat with the lordly elephant standing in it leans right and left at every step. As he contemplated on the soul of the universe as no other than himself, stopping his breath as well as his senses, all the worlds as well as their guardian deities resorted for protection to Sri Hari, for they felt much agonized for want of breath. For he was like drawing the prana of the worlds into himself through the force of his tapas. The Devas said, "O Lord, we have never known before such stoppage of breath in the case of all living beings, mobile as well as immobile. Rid us, therefore, of this calamity, since we have sought protection with you, who afford shelter to all." The Lord said, "Dhruva has identified his self with me. This accounts for the stoppage of breath of all of you. Hence be not afraid and return each to your own abode. I shall deter the child from his penance, which is so hard to resist." Thus ends the 8th discourse, forming part of the story of Dhruva in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. So his explanation of what's happening here is Dhruva has stopped his own breathing, and Dhruva has so identified himself with Vishnu, who is the universe, that he is thereby starting to act as Vishnu, and by stopping his own breathing, he is starting to stop the whole universe's breathing. So powerfully has he identified himself with the wholeness of all existence. And obviously this is the problem, so Vishnu is going to have to go and intervene a little bit. But I think we can stop there for now. There's actually quite a bit more to the story of Dhruva, and so we can probably have the rest of it next time. Thank you all for coming. If anybody has any questions about any of that, I'm happy to hang out for a little while, but I don't want to keep people too much longer if we need to go do things.
Yeah, I had a, I was missed last week. Did I miss the the Shiva, the Sati story maybe?
Yeah, that was the story from that was the main story from last week. Yeah.
Cool. And now what happened this week kind of went, kind of goes fast and complex through it, like with Daksa.
Yes.
So Shiva, what happened with him and Shiva in the beginning of the reading today?
In the beginning today, in the beginning of the reading today, Daksha was dead. Shiva's Virabhadra avatar had cut off his head and burned it in a fire.
Right.
So what happened is all the other devas and sages and prajapatis and such who had been involved in the yajna, many of whom were badly wounded, went and prayed for Shiva's forgiveness, which Shiva was quick to grant. Shiva is kind of quick to wrath, quick to forgive, quick to grant fruits of however you treat him.
And the wrath that he killed Daksha with was upon Daksa killing Sati.
Daksha did not kill Sati directly. Sati actually killed herself. But she was driven to it by Daksha. Daksha hated Shiva, who was his father-in-law.
Right.
There was a long story of him insulting Shiva and insulting Sati. And essentially Sati was, having a bad family relationship is different when you're immortal, when that's going to go on forever. It's kind of a bigger deal than if it's going to be like, okay, for 70 years, 80 years, whatever, you might have to put up with this, probably less. Your parents aren't going to live that long, probably. If you and your father are immortal beings who are going to live for millions and millions of years, she was like, no, I will not accept someone who reviles Shiva as my father. I'm going to drop this body and take a new birth with somebody better. And that's exactly what she did.
Wow.
And it was upon that Shiva became so enraged and sent forth his Virabhadra avatar to go and destroy Daksha's yajna and kill Daksha. So that's what they did. Then upon propitiating him, calming him down, making offerings to him and so on, he came back along with his attendants and raised Daksha from the dead but replaced his severed head with the head of a goat.
Right.
And so Daksha, thereafter, for the rest of his life, for that kalpa, at least for the whole rest of the kalpa, is goat-headed. And Daksha saw the error of his ways and apologized and worshipped Shiva thereafter. And Vishnu himself showed up specifically to correct Daksha. That it's like it was because Daksha was worshiping Vishnu. Daksha was a great devotee of Vishnu, and the yajna that he was performing was a yajna to Vishnu that Shiva came and destroyed. And Vishnu showed up to say, "This was a mistake. Shiva is the same being as me. If you insult Shiva, you insult me. Like the worship is fully due to both of us." Just to make sure that Daksha got the message. So that was essentially the story in brief.
And that was the reason Vishnu appeared in that case, was just to get the point across, huh?
Well, they were making offerings to him at this yajna. So he also came to he accepted the offerings directly from Daksha's hands. But essentially, it was to get the point across of like, this isn't like Shiva as a tyrant who will come and bully you if you disrespect him. The point is, Shiva is the same being as Vishnu. Disrespecting one is disrespecting the other. Both are fully due worship in the yajna and should both be recognized as aspects of Bhagavan. And so, yeah, he appeared to make that point.
Wow. And they mentioned the guardians of the spheres. Is there a Sanskrit name for those beings?
Lokapalas. When they say guardian of the sphere, it's usually translating Lokapala.
Loka, like a sphere. What's the other one?
Lokapala. I just typed it in the chat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Loka, essentially spheres is kind of an iffy translation. Loka essentially means world or realm. The guardians of the spheres are like, for example, Brahma is the guardian of Brahma Loka. Agni is the guardian of Agni Loka. Yama is the guardian of Yama Loka, and so on. That's essentially there are many devas and other beings who are guardians of spheres. Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Here, I can stop the recording on Facebook.